All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Where are we?
Hollywood, New Jersey.
The world famous 12-step house in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There we go. Got that out of the way right away. And again, my name is Matty and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 31st, 1989. I am a member of the East Naples Men's Group. Deli is our thing. So why, I have no idea, but why it's called East Naples Men's Group when it's in Pembroke Pines is a long story. But that being said, it's a bunch of alcoholics, right? So, and I'm also a lifetime member of the Belford Clearview Group, which meets also on Tuesday nights in Middletown, New Jersey. And I've been, yeah, it's a long drive. And sometimes like the old Wallflower song, right? With one headlight, right? One eye closed, one headlight. Right? So here we are in step 7. First, let's give a little shout out to Mustang Sally, who I saw Saturday night, and they supplied a brand new microphone and cord and, you know, their inputs and that, and how good is it? That's true service. If you're anywhere, you know, I'm 70 years old. I'll be 71 in September. And, you know, if you're my age, and I made the remark when the feedback and everything was going, you know, that it was, I needed Chipmunk from Woodstock, and Woodstock was August of 1969. Here's my quick little Woodstock story. So if you were paying attention as I was sharing some of my stuff, my first drunk that was horrific was the night the men landed on the moon, if you remember that part, July of 1969. I was able to get out of most of the trouble that my friends had gotten into. We had a larger family, we had things, so I was able to skirt around. So here it is now, August, and a lot of guys in our town, all the older guys, are going to Woodstock. So us 4 who had just been in trouble in July, come up with this master plan. So we're going to stay at Chris Dilger's house. His brother Bobby and his friends are going to Woodstock. So we said, if we did this and packed a little stuff, could we ride with you guys? So he laughed it off, but we thought we were going. So we all sleep over at Chris's house. These guys get up at 2, 3 in the morning. They're packing up their car, their tents and everything, and they're going. We're trying to sneak out. And there's Chris's mom and dad at the front door, like this. Where do you juvenile delinquents think you're going? Hum, you know, oh, we're going to go. And it's turned right around. You're all on probation from last July's spectacular outing that the 4 of you had. So it was not to go into Woodstock, but it was just, you know, the thinking process of a 14-year-old who had just started his journey on alcoholic drinking. So here we are at step 7. Step 7, Braden, would you read step 7?
My name is Braden, and I'm a powerless alcoholic. Step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings.
Thank you. Extra credit. Whose hand's going up first?
Humility.
Awesome. What's your first name again? Awesome. Gold star for you, man. Awesome. Humility. I sent, naturally, if I don't send it to Clarissa, she gets upset. So we're gonna do prayers. We're gonna do a bunch of stuff. But this is me.
That's me.
Where's my?
I don't know.
There it is. Clarissa, you read it. Read C.S. Lewis, please. For me, it was the easiest, most distinctive, best description of humility that I heard when I first came to AA.
Yes, I love it. True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Perfect. There's many great descriptions of humility. That's one of my favorites. Okay, so it all starts There's so much little in the big book, right? It starts on page 76, I believe. Yes, which is what it is. Remember, we spoke about the 2 paragraphs in that. And again, I don't know if this is urban legend, if divine intervention, whatever, or how great Bill Wilson, if anybody doesn't know, that's our co-founders over there, Bill and Bob. And as we said last week, step 6, 4 sentences. Step 7, 4 sentences. In the book here. The main part, and we'll get into it because I'm going to need your help with this. But step 7, as Braden just read, how cool is it? 1, it's the shortest step. 7th step contains 7 words. So 7s are wild. Mickey Mantle was all over this. 7s were wild. If you know who he is, you know that number. So, and here it is. I'll wait on that. Anybody that would care to join me, here's what the big book starts off. Now remember, step 5, we've gone to wrongs. Step 6, we've gone to defects of character. Step 7, we're at shortcomings. Wrongs, defects, shortcomings. All meaning the same thing. It's what made us the alcoholic that we became, our defects of character. We just review quick. After you've done your 5th step, you take your book off the shelf. You spend an hour alone. You meet up with God and you discuss your first 5 proposals. And then you go in. And then it says, when you've done your 6th step, because remember, we are entirely ready. So now when you're entirely ready, you go into step 7. It's so cool. It just flows. You've done 5. That burden is over. You've taken the hour. You're feeling good. I shared you my lunatic 5th step story with the guy in the deli, but I did calm down after that, and I did have my time with God and with Nani too. And he then went in and said, it's now time for step 7. When entirely ready, we say something like this. So if you know it, please say it with me. We're going to recite the 7th step prayer. Okay? On 3. You ready? 1, 2, 3. My Creator, I am now willing that you have all of me, the good and the bad. I pray that you'll remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go from here to do thy bidding. Awesome. Amen. The end. You're done. 5, 6, 7, and here it is. You're going to be looking at these defects of character. By now you're probably intimate with my relationship with Ronnie Shriver, my first sponsor, who I did the first 9 steps with. Remember I shared with you guys we would have a little GIF and memes before there were GIFs and memes, right? And we named each one of the steps, right? And when we got to step 7, and we knew, he always made me write the principles down, right? And I think he thought that I was well on my way. I hadn't been drinking for months now. And he had noticed, he had seen the change in me. He had seen the change. He saw my defects were starting to fade. Let me show you the kind of man that he was. If he sponsored you and you were married with children, or if you had children, he wanted to meet your spouse and he wanted to meet your kids. So he would come up to the house. Now I had shared with you guys, I had lost my job, I had lost my home, I had lost my license. I was thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. I'm living in a tenement kind of house with my wife and 4 kids. And he came up upstairs. It was a 2-3 story walk up, and it was a small little place. But it had a roof over our head as I'm trying to stay sober. So he said, we sat down, introduced, my wife Liz and my kids. And they went into the other room, and he says to me, how about some coffee? I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So I shoot my wife from across the little kitchen the look like, so you want to start making coffee? And he looks at me and he says, and he called me a derogatory name that starts with AS. He said, I want you to get up and make a pot of coffee. Again, another resentment. Why did I pick this guy to be my sponsor? I can hate him. So now I make a big example, pushing the chair back and I go make the coffee. I didn't know how to make coffee. How much goes in, if I'm making how many cups, how many scoops go in? John will tell you, I still have an issue with a lot of that there too. So then it was that. So, that's 36 years ago. The defining moments in your recovery. For all you guys that are here that have been here this past 6 weeks, that you keep coming back, that's awesome. I really appreciate it. But these are the things you'll never forget. These moments in your life if you don't drink or drug again. So when we got to, we're done with all that. I remember I told you I met him up on the cliffs of the Hudson River in Hoboken where he lived and that whole thing. So I did 5 and then now we're into 6 and now into 7. And, we had done that. So when it came time to name our little step, he had said to me, again, never out loud, but I felt it. I could feel that he had the confidence in me that there was a good chance that maybe I was all in and understanding the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he said to me, it's all about humility. It's all about being humble, right? That word humble. How did we ask? We humbly asked. Humbly is one of the most powerful adverbs ever. Humbly, right? An adverb is going to put the sunshine on the verb, ask. That's all God wants us to do. Just humbly ask. But then that humility word comes in. And that sometimes, all I knew about humility was when people would say, you have to have a force feeding of humble pie. Now, the only thing I knew about humble pie was I saw humble pie in the early 70s at the Fillmore East with a young Peter Frampton. Yep. And their big song was 30 Days in the Hole. 30 days. I could hear the opening chords now. See, when my mom worked at the Garden and I worked, my dad was there and I would soon get there, I had access to concerts all the time. And here I am at 16 at the Fillmore. Not remembering anything about it, but 30 Days in the Hole, and I was thinking about it. I played it today. I said, Alexa, play 30 Days in the Hole by Humble Pie. And I'm thinking, man, who knew then at 16 that I'd be spending like 30 years in the hole in alcoholic drinking and behavior. Actually, it was 20. But that's the kind of things the memories and stuff that we had. So he would say to me, and he finally included himself in something. We're up to step 7, and he's taking the credit, but it's not like me and you will do this. It was you. And then he said to me, if we are not humble, we may just stumble. Right? We may just stumble. He hated the word slip. He would say, there's no such thing as a slip. Back in the 80s, guys, I had a slip, Old timers, BS, Under every skirt, there's a slip, they would say. And that's where that came. That's what that was. So we got to that, and we did, we went through the whole thing there. Then he made me write his favorite definition of humility, right? A clear recognition, it's in the book, right? Who knew that? I mean, he was an old timer then. When I picked up my 90-day pin, our medallion, our little thing, Ronnie picked up 10 years the same night. That was remarkable. But he would say, humility is a clear recognition that we learned in step 5, a clear recognition of what and who we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. See, there were many nights when I would sit on the bar stool as my life was falling apart and staring in the mirror and trying to figure out what's going on. What did I do wrong? And I would pray to my God at that point, knowing that there was something terribly wrong with me. And it just kept getting worse. See, alcoholism is a disease that centers in our mind. And it's progressive by nature, and it will eat your soul continuously if you permit it. But my problem was from 14 to 34, I made various attempts to stay sober. But I loved the lifestyle so much. And I've shared this with you guys before. If you do that and it's progressive, you'll take hit after hit after hit. It progressively gets worse, never better. And you know what? As I'm destroying not only my life, my parents, my brothers and sisters, my wife and kids. I cared, but I didn't care. I was willing to continue to take the hits because I did not want to give up that lifestyle. And then the day that I surrendered, it wasn't like one of those unbelievable things that I've had in the past. It was my time, you know. I know today that it was the God of my understanding put his hand in my shoulder and wasn't calling me home, but he was telling me, it's time to straighten out your life. I want you to start to be the man that you're meant to be. And it was like, wow. No, I don't know that then, but I know it many years later. You know, no more 30 days in the hole. I'm getting out. And so when we started the work, again, it's only the one paragraph, the 4 lines, the 7 words. So we go to the genius of Bill Wilson 13 years later. Okay. If you're not familiar, this is the 12 and 12. This was given to me by him. No, this was from rehab when I got in a Century House. You know, it was the old hardcover with the little church little thing. And here's what we went to, and when we started on page 71 on step 7. So we're going to talk about this, and then we'll get into it a little bit. But just listen to the genius of his writing, how he describes the past, the present, and the future of how this disease, as I've said to you before, will rob you of everything. And for me, at the end, it was robbing my soul. For thousands of years, we have been demanding more than our share of security, prestige, and romance. When we seemed to be succeeding, we drank to dream still greater dreams. When we were frustrated, even in part, we drank for oblivion. Never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. I want, when I want it. The heck with everything else. I'm just going to take it. Not worried about the consequences. In all these strivings, here's the kicker that slaps me across the face again. In all these strivings, so many of them well-intentioned, our crippling handicap had been our lack of excellence. Man, this is some class. This is awesome. I always wanted to be a teacher. You know, even when my kids were growing up, and man, they used to hate me when I would make them do their homework and I would check everything. Now I'm sober and I'm checking all their stuff and the lists and stuff that we had. And it was, you know, Dad, you're not my teacher. And I said, well, in a way I am. So, but that was part of that. So excellent class here tonight. All right. So, and again, he continues, we had lacked the perspective. Paul and I talk about our 2 least used words in AA, perspective and shift. Paul Baker is my current sponsor. Perspective and shift. We had lacked that perspective to see that character building and spiritual values had to come first, and that material satisfactions were not the purpose of living. You know, when I first sat down with him, you know, I said to him, and we started the step work, and we were formulating this plan. And I said, Ron, you know, I got to get a job. And like O'Keefe's, John, his sponsor, would say to him, you had a job. You know, and then but I want a good job. You had a good job. You know, all the things that we give away. I said, you know, I'm thousands in debt. And we would just go, just for today, try not to drink. We'll see what happens. And those were the things there. Then we moved onto page 72. We would highlight all this, and it's still highlighted here. Because we're talking about character. I shared with you last week. You know, a lot of us are character. But character is something internal that comes to us. It makes us the men and women that we are. It makes us that humble person that people can count on today. Something that for years, for 20 years, I could never do. I wanted to. I would have a flash of it here and there. But that calling, like I spoke last week about walking past Max's Briefcase Pub, calling me in, and sitting down and taking that first shot and beer. It was that feeling was there. And then 5 hours, 5 days later, who knows what it was going to be, but it was that feeling. That feeling comes magnified 100 times more with my relationship with God and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one day you guys will get there. But we went into a bit about the character building. So seldom do we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would look like to strive for, whether our intellectual needs were met or not. You know, I always thought I was the smartest kid in the class, but I wasn't. I was far from it. I was the scaredest kid in the class a lot, but I would never let you ever see that. You know, so when I drank, I became a tough guy sometimes. That feeling, that release that it gave you, that I didn't have to let you know the scared little boy that I was. You know, for as long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively by our own strength and intelligence, just for that long period of time, a working faith with a higher power, my God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is impossible. Now, there's no getting around the definition of that word. Impossible is impossible. But there's possibilities that if you don't drink or drug and you start to follow these steps, and if you're already at step 7, you're on your way. Then he asked me again, underline this, because what's the basic ingredient? The basic ingredient of all humility is a desire to seek and do God's will. You know, God's will. Remember I shared with you last week when, you know, I love my acronyms, and as a kid growing up, my first FM transistor radio, listening to Allison Steele, the Nightbird on WNEW FM in New York, and I forget some of the other, Dennis Elsis, all these are either dead or in their 80s now, and listening to FM music like that. And it was like, wow, you know, how does this happen? How does this happen like that? So then as we would catch on, and then God's will, remember I was saying to you, the acronym WNEW, and then the station that came out later was WPLJ. So then I was working with that, and I said to Ron, hey, I came up with this great idea about God's will, because we had gone over the notes. And I told them WPLJ. W is the work. This is the work. The books, the relationship with your sponsor, most importantly, your relationship with God. P, prayer. Prayer. L, love. J, joy. Remember we spoke the last couple times. Happiness is fleeting. I'll accept all rounds of applause. Last week, not yet, last week, I've been playing golf for 20 years, and last week, May 14th, 15th, whatever, on hole number 10 on Orange Brook West, I had a hole in one. That was happiness. Happiness is fleeting, because here's why. That was hole number 10. If you know anything about golf, The next 5 holes, I double bogeyed every hole. So that happiness, that joy was fleeting and gone. But when I went home and everybody knew, that joy will stay with me forever. I'll have that with me forever. But that's the part that we get into there, into the joy. So then as we were moving forward into step 7, we got into, this is all humility. You guys know that, right? It's the whole thing is all about humility. We may still have no very high opinion of humility as a desirable personal virtue. Personal, how important it is to me. But we do recognize it as necessary for our survival. I mean, listen to the words. Impossible. Survival. You know, I just can't read through this, tell them I did the work, like some of my guys have done in the past, you know, and just say, you know, well, I'm done. If you're done, if that's how you want to do it, then you'll probably drink again. But this time, when you practice that part of humility, here's the promise that will lead it all through step 7. Because by this time, we have gained some measure of release from our more devastating handicap. Devastating. Impossible. Devastating. What was the other one that he had? Whatever, that's cool. And then here's the promise again. Our perception, our perspective of humility has it starting to increase and get stronger. We're understanding it because your life is changing and your eyes begin to open to the immense values which have come straight out of our painful ego punching. Until that happened to me, and I've shared with you guys many times, Mrs. Delaney, who I only met once when she came to our home group in West New York on our, I think it was 50th anniversary, and she spoke, and she had ran the Alina Lodge in Jersey, and she was the one who I think they give credit to for the famous phrase, she was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. God bless, Fred. Inferiority complex, man, I could understand that. I could really understand that. Again, it's over and over and over. In 4 lines, 1 paragraph becomes the 7 pages here, and every 30th word is the word humility. During this process of learning more about humility, the most profound result of all was the change in our attitude towards God. You know, when I was doing my prep and reading that and going over all my own notes, and I went back and I had it written in here, I don't know, 1968. You guys know how I share a lot about how important music. I mean, I took guitar lessons for about 3 weeks, and I wanted to be a lead guitar player, but I didn't want to practice. Right? Sound familiar to a lot of? I didn't want to devote the time after school to meet Mr. DeGraw, the teacher, to practice because I might miss something out there. You know, I wanted to be Keith Richards, but you know,
Jimmy Page.
yeah, whatever. But I was neither of that. But my love of music has always been there. And then when we're talking about our relationship with God, and it all starts in the 7th step with prayer. Now, if anybody remembers, you know, 1968, 1969, I was a big Doors fan. I loved all music. Doors have an album called Soft Parade. Jim Morrison opens up. Way back then, I was in seminary school. There was something there that put forth the proposition that you can petition the Lord with prayer. And he says it over and over. Then he screams, you cannot petition the Lord with prayer. And I thought, man, at 13, 14 years old, I thought that was so cool. You know, I'm in a house full of, you know, you're going to church every Sunday and grandma and everybody's there. But, you know, how your mind at such a young age can be so influenced by that. You know, it was like, for years, I never know when, and my sisters, we had ages right after each other. So we'd all be listening to that. And, you know, when my sister Kathy would say to me, Mr. Mojo Rising, you know, she'd be singing that and I'd be singing that. She goes, Matty, do you know that, take all the letters, Mojo Rising is Jim Morrison. I said, wow, look at these brilliant things that I learned. That's where my head was at. And I'm sitting there, and again, I told Alexa to play that, and I'm listening to that. See, because it gives me the focal point to go back on these decades of my life, to realize where I am today. And here it is. The words, this was the turning point for me when I fully understood it. But the words, of myself I am nothing, the Father doeth the works. It began to finally carry great promise and meaning. You know, that was really, really important for me. So as we continued along, and then, you know, we'd go into some of the stuff there, and, you know, by years later, as I've shared with you many times about when I first I'm sober a little bit while, and I told you guys in my home group in Belford, the Clearview group, we had a step meeting, and then we had our home group meeting. And it was one of the reasons why I picked East Naples, because it was the same format. And one of our guys came down from Miami, I've already shared you that, came back with a cassette of 6 cassettes of Ray O'Keefe doing the steps in North Miami events. And again, I've shared with you, there's 2 men in my life, 2 disembodied voices, men I never met but have only heard or seen on tape, that have changed the course of my sobriety. And Ray was one of them. I say that all the time. And he's pretty right to the point about step 7. When he says, when I work with my guys in step 7, it's about 3 things: money, power, and sex. Those 3 things. Now we're talking about defects of character, those basic instincts that have been warped, right? And then he said when he was able to finally start to understand Alcoholics Anonymous, and his sponsor told him that AA, the program itself, can be narrowed down to these 2 words: honesty and humility. So by this point now in step 7, you know, I'm honest most of the time in my life. I'm preparing. I know what's coming. When, you know, we'll talk, we'll listen to Pat, you know, when you're ready to get 8, we'll get into 8 next week, but don't look at 9 before you look at 8. Just 8's a list, and we'll get there next week. But it was Ray's things, right? I tell my guys too, what are the 2 things that'll take you out? Finance and romance. Boom. 2 things. You can have honesty and humility, or you can have finance and romance. Now, those 2 things are important to all of us. If they're not, then there's something wrong with you. You know, what does Russell say, you know, about money? You know, it's really not that important, almost, you know, just as important as oxygen, you know, but it's when they're twisted. That's the word, twisted, those defects, where we lose sight of its proper purpose. Each one of them has it. God gave us those instincts. And how do I do that? In my prayer, in my petition, and that's what made me think of that when I read that about the Jim Morrison thing. Prayer is not a demand. You know, I'm going to say this, and almost every head will shake, you know, for those of us that, I did it again. You know, you're banging on the steering wheel, and your driver's license has been suspended, and the cops are pulling in behind you, and you're saying, please, God, please get me out of this one. Please get me out of this one. Please get me out of this one. The cop comes up to the window with the nightstick. He bangs on the window, and he's a friend of your uncle's.
Yeah.
I'll follow you home, Matty. I'm 17. I've had my license like 6 months. I'll follow you home. You know, coincidences? No. Those are what I thought were coincidences, and there's hundreds of those behaviors that I had. But it's God always, and again, there's a clear example. He lives up to his end of the bargain. And for brief moments, I said, okay, thank you very much. and then I'll take it from here, and then shortly thereafter. How do I develop this relationship with my God? Well, it's through patience and help. Help is what we do for each other in the room. Help is when you decide that you're going to stick around. If you're all in, then there's things that you hear at a lot of meetings. These are suggestions. Suggestions is a pretty loose word, Get a sponsor. Get a home group. Get active in that home group. 6 words we live by at East Naples. Right, John? Trust God, clean house, help others. Bingo. This was an add-on I got when I wanted up here a couple months back. So, as I'm progressing with him and my life is starting to change, and my defect of character would still come in as, now I'm sober a few years. My job came back. I share with you guys, people in my group went out of their way to help me get my license back. I'm driving. We got out of the tenement that we have, and we have a nice little home down in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and life is getting good. And it's starting to get good, but problems will come. I have teenagers at this point in time that are going off the rails a little bit, going off the rails. And I'm not happy. And I'm trying to keep it together. At this point in time, my favorite guy, we're watching, did you guys ever watch the series Ray Donovan?
Yep.
Right? Man, that guy is so cool. Right? He's an evil man. Was not a nice man, but he was a fixer. And that's what I thought I could do. I could fix my wife. I could fix my kids. I could fix my sponsees. And I couldn't even fix myself most times. See, I'm not a fixer. I have to become a listener, and that's what it needs to be. If you read Emmett Fox, today's was really pretty cool. Emmett, I wrote it down on this blank spot on the page here. There are only 2 feelings for humankind. If you have a relationship with God or you haven't had one yet, there's only 2 feelings as a human being. Who wants to take a guess? One?
Fear.
Excellent, John. Gold star for John. Love and fear. And he goes in. This is what won me over, and you'll love this. He's a pretty smart guy, Emmett. Bill Wilson did a lot of Emmett Fox listening. There's a slender thread that linked those guys together with the secretary, or I don't know the whole basis of it, but Bill and Emmett knew of each other. But Emmett says this today, of the 2 things that Jana just pointed out. And just think of this. Because if you're on good spiritual ground, this is how it should be. Love. Love is creative. Fear is destructive. Think of all the fears in your life, real or imagined, and the destruction that they did to them. And then we get into, it's humility is this new attitude that we have, that we went into that. And last Saturday night, was it Saturday? Friday night. You did CA. I went up to Pompano to hear Dion and Adam J., the 2-speaker meeting at St. Ambrose. And I love D. D is my great grand sponsor. And I was hoping that he would get into, he has a relationship with God that I admire. And he always talks about Bishop Barron, and he's one of my favorites. D introduced me to, Matty, start listening to Bishop Barron. And during COVID, that's what we started to do. When Men Fully Alive was born back in March of 2020. And he would talk about those things there. And he would talk about that I learned in Don Bosco High School, St. Thomas Aquinas. And the four substitutes for God that Aquinas talks about. And if I closed my eyes, it sounded like it was coming from Ray Oakey or any other senior member of AA that's been through hell and back. What are the four substitutes that most people, but especially alcoholics, right? So we had money, power, sex. We had romance, finance, but Aquinas, right? Hundreds of years ago. The four substitutes for God. 1, wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. Those perfectly great instincts, when they're out of focus, then that's when my life starts to change for the worst. I want to read one little thing and we'll start to wrap it up here from the Little Red Book.
Bless you.
God bless, gentlemen. All right, so we talked about prayer being the petition. We'll elaborate on that when we get to step 11, right? Because what do? We see when we get there. I saw through prayer and meditation that are a focal point of my life, but that's a couple of weeks away. We're on 7 now. But prayer is the key. Prayer is the key. When it started in 5, into 6, into 7, my daily petitions with my God. Prayer is our highest type of mental energy. It serves a threefold purpose. By it, we ask for God's help. We thank Him for our recovery. And we ask Him to maintain contented sobriety. 2 perfect words. Contented sobriety. That's all we can wish for. I want sobriety, but I'd like to have contented sobriety. There was nothing outstanding about an alcoholic's prayer to God. It's just a simple, sincere affair. The alcoholic has nothing to lose, right? It starts with, please get me out of this one, but then that changes, but stands to gain sobriety. He gains sane behavior. He gains peace of mind. And happiness will come to him, for him, and for his family. Man, let's think about that. The promises that we're given, and we're only halfway through. Well, that'll come at step 9, that famous line about being amazed before you're halfway through. But this is just through 7. 5, 6, 7, done. And you're moving. Let's go. Let's go. I'm going to end with this. I haven't said this in a while. This is from a plaque in Dr. Bob's office. Excuse me, one sec. Forgive me. Should be better prepared. Notes. Search. Here it is. From a plaque on Dr. Bob's desk. A lot of you guys that have been around for a while will understand it. I remember on 2 of these lines at a very trying point in my life a few years back where I had to do exactly what this prayer says. And here's what it says. Perpetual quietness of heart. It is to have no trouble. It is never to be fretted or vexed, irritable or sore, to wonder at nothing that is done to me, or to feel nothing done against me. It is to be at rest when nobody praises me. And when I am blamed or despised, it is to have a blessed home in myself, in my soul, as I always looked at it. Now I can go in and shut the door and pray to my Father in secret and be at peace, as in the deep sea of calmness, when all around and about is seeming trouble. Right, when I was leaving in the car down here, I always put on Hillsong United and play Oceans, and well, then with this. When these things happen to me, there's only one thing that I need to do. I petition my Lord with prayer. Sorry, Jim. And I think of the Hillsong United, Taya saying, I keep my eyes above the waves. Love you guys. Thank you.